Welcome to another episode of Living Legal Legends. Today's episode is entitled Living in the Courtroom, and we're very pleased to have two gentlemen with us today who indeed have lived much of their lives in the courtroom. We have Judge Arthur Fong, bar number 192, and trial attorney emeritus Ray Tam, bar number 552. Welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Thank you. I don't know what emeritus means.
It just means you're a
Older.
really well-known, smart guy who tries cases very well. And it's my understanding, Ray, that you're part of an organization of very elite trial attorneys. Could you give us the name of that organization?
Oh, the organization is the International Academy of Trial Lawyers.
Right. And it's also my understanding that there's a rule that that organization has when you're in mixed company. Can you describe that?
Oh, that's a beautiful rule that we have. Every time we go to dinners, whether it's the American College of Trial Lawyers, the American Bar, the Hawaii Bar, unfortunately, lawyers have a tendency to dominate the conversation in dinners and talk about law and what his last case and how did you do it and so forth. And the wives are bored to death. So we have a rule in the academy that in mixed company, we do not talk about anything about law. Talk about anything else you want, but not about law. And we get along very cordially and very well.
I think that's a really good rule.
I think that's something the Hawaii State Bar should adopt.
In social settings, for sure.
That's right.
Ray, I have with me a book entitled A St. Louis Man, The Story of Hawaii's Ray Tam. And I just want to hold it up to the camera so that our viewers can see that. And I went through it. We did our homework at the HSBA. And I did notice a really interesting photo. And I'm going to hold that up as well. And I want you to tell our members and viewers why was this photo taken? This looks like Chief Justice, I think, Brennan. Can you tell us what the occasion was and I assume that's you shaking the Chief Justice's hand, is that correct?
Well, let me just correct you. It's really Associate Justice William Brennan of the U.S. Supreme Court.
Did he ever make it to CJ? Why do I think he was CJ?
No, he was very
influential,
vocal and influential, but he was never Chief Justice.
Thank you. Describe for us what that photo is and why it was taken.
Oh, very well. I was at the University of Notre Dame, and we had, like almost every law school, the moot court competition. And in the moot court competition, we had two students selected on one side and two students selected on the other side, and it was one of these competitions. If you won, you go ahead to the next level. If you lose, you're out. And so we proceeded, and at the end, fortunately, I was one of the last four to succeed. And at the University of Notre Dame, we were always lucky that a Supreme Court justice would come and hear the final argument. And so he came, and he was in our moot court session, the Chief Justice. And the auditorium was packed, and my partner and I were assigned to represent the government in a security risk case. And we knew that Justice Brennan hated government involvement and was always for human rights. And so that I knew that as soon as I stepped in there, that he would be asking many, many questions of me. So I stood up and I started arguing. I started, "May it please the court." And before I could say anything more, he started asking me a question and another question. And each one I had to respond rapidly. So it's rapid questions, rapid responses. And he went on and on and on. And I can only tell you that about the 10th question, I remember saying to myself, why the hell doesn't he let me talk instead of asking me all these questions? But he did. He fired away because he was always asking, well, are you familiar with this particular case? And I would say, yes, sir. But I would say, this is not the ruling in that case, etc. And we finished. And fortunately, I was one of the two that were selected and won the competition. Later, we had taped the entire program. I counted that he asked me in 10 minutes, 27 questions. In other words, 3 questions a minute on this particular case, and it was really high drama and high frightening experience, but we prevailed. Can I continue on that one just for a minute?
Please.
Because after that, we had, after we won, my partner was Bill Reagan. Bill Reagan and I then had to compete against schools in the Midwest. So we had competitions against the schools at Michigan, Indiana, and Illinois, and we prevailed. Now, I have to talk about one thing that really irked me at the end. The last competition was at the Illinois Supreme Court against the University of Illinois. And we argued, and we won. And there were, the courthouse was packed with lawyers from Chicago and the nearby areas. And after we won, and we did a pretty good job. After we won, these lawyers would all congregate and talk to my partner, Bill Reagan, and the two losing students or lawyers, and nobody talked to me. And I could hear them talking about placement and jobs and so forth. And I was like the wallflower. And immediately I said to myself, there's no place here for Asians. Hawaii, here I come. And that's why I left.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Ray. What year was that?
1958.
Yeah. Judge, did you ever, when you were on the bench, and I want to ask you about your earlier career shortly, but when you were on the bench, did you ever pepper any lawyers with 27 questions in 10 minutes?
No. I usually let them argue, but usually I know ahead of time, having read the briefs and studied the cases, I know which way I am inclined to rule. So I usually let the side that I did not favor proceed, and then after that, I ask very few questions because I was prepared for them, most of it. You know, when you have 45 or 50 motions a morning, you don't have much time for all those questions. You have to be prepared. That's what my chief assignment, as far as I was concerned, was to make a ruling. Because if I don't rule, the case does not proceed. And to me, the judge's primary decision as a motion judge is to rule on the matter. If I'm wrong, there's an avenue of appeal, and that can be taken at a later date.
Did you take many motions under advisement in your years on the bench?
In my early days, I would take maybe 4 or 5, but at the end, I would rule 95% of the time that day.
From the bench?
On the bench.
Judge Fong, could you tell us about the beginnings of your legal career, where you started?
Well, I came back from law school at University of Michigan. I started with my brother, who was had been in the Internal Revenue Service, and we had very little, but I had not much of a practice. A young lawyer without experience is very difficult getting started in Hawaii. Lucky for me, I had a small retainer from my relatives, which kept me alive for a little bit. And luckily for me, a gentleman who became a politician full-time, Daniel K. Inouye, was elected and started his political career. A fellow named Bernie Trask recommended that I apply for the prosecutor's job, and luckily enough, I got the job at the handsome salary of $5,400 a month, a year.
$5,400 a year?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's terrific. Did you feel pretty good about that?
Oh, I love the job because to me, you see the other side of life. You don't see much of. Yeah, I tried everything. I had over 50 jury trials during that period of time. I was in the prosecutor's office for about, I think, 4.5 years, and I had 50 jury trials. Everything from rape, murder, bribery. The St. Louis bribery case, that was one of the cases I had. Really interesting time doing that. I enjoyed it.
And how many years were you the prosecutor?
4.5 years.
Okay. And from there, where did you go?
I became, state had just come in 1959, and I was lucky enough to move in to help transition the state from territory to the state. And we were organizing government at that time. Luckily for me, I worked reorganizing government and streamlining government to what it is, most of it today,
In which office?
in the Attorney General's office.
Okay. And how many years were you there?
I was in the Attorney General's office for, I think, to 1970. So about 11 years, 10 and a half years. The funny thing, I started as a Republican under Bill Quinn. And when Bill Quinn ran for governor the second time, he lost to Governor Jack Burns. And I had campaigned for Quinn because, as you remember, the reason he lost the first time, Burns lost the first time, he stayed in Washington, and Aku Head Pupuli came up with a slogan, the second Mahele. The second Mahele was returning land to the public, which was not possible for Republican in a Democrat legislature. Whatever bill was submitted, the legislature never passed it. So when Quinn was defeated, I submitted my resignation because I campaigned for Quinn. But luckily, for some reason, Bert Kobayashi Sr., who was the Attorney General, says, "You're not going that easy. You tell me who I keep and who I don't keep. I'm running a law office, and I want the best people here to run that office." And luckily for him, we kept 6 Republicans. And one thing good about that, I told the boys there, you're in a political situation, and when it comes time to campaign, you have to give your share to the Democrats who kept you in office. And they always did. There was no problem with that.
Right. That may persist. I'm not sure. Ray, can I ask you, how did you start your career? After making that decision to move to Hawaii, where did you start?
Well,
I mean, come back to Hawaii.
well, first, let me say I want to thank the Hawaii State Bar for having this particular program. I think it's important to keep the legacy of how we started and what happened to us during the early years. And it wasn't all peaches and cream. I watched Vernon Char talk about the Howley law firms. I heard Dan Case say the same thing, so I want to repeat some of these things and tell you how it really was in our territorial days.
Yeah, thank you. And give us the time frame too. Would
Okay.
this have been 58?
Okay, let me just start from the beginning.
Sure.
I'll just tell you that I was born and raised in Wahiawa, went to Lelahua School for a short time, then to St. Louis, graduated from St. Louis, then the University of Michigan, where I did my undergrad, and then the University of Notre Dame for law school. I finished in 1958. This was before statehood. And so I passed the bar, and my license says Supreme Court Territory of Hawaii. Now, during that period of time, some people have coined it the plantation mentality. And let me explain that one. My good friend, Fred Trotter, former Campbell Estate trustee, wrote in the Honolulu magazine, he said, to be successful in life, do not have the plantation mentality. Never think that you are better than the other person, because we are all equal. And the plantation mentality, I think, is a derivative of the colonial days. I think the worst offensive example of that was in Shanghai. In Shanghai, there was a sign that Dr. Sun Yat-sen exclaimed, and I saw a picture of it: "No dogs or Chinese allowed in the park." And this is a park that the Chinese had built. But somehow the British, the French, the Russians, the Germans had come in and they took the park. In Hong Kong, the top place was the peak, Victoria's Peak. Only whites allowed. And you see the same thing in India, where they had the caste system, in Africa and South Africa, Rhodesia, and so forth. Hawaii was not immune from that. You see, I have this jacket, Wildlife Country Club. I'm a member of Wildlife Country Club. In 1958, no whites, only whites, I'm sorry, only whites allowed at Wildlife Country Club. Only whites allowed in the Oahu Country Club. Only whites allowed in the Outrigger Canoe Club. Only whites allowed in the Pacific Club. Now, I experienced this type of plantation mentality personally myself. In 1957, I returned home for the summer, and I worked in the summer for American Factors, one of the big five companies. And in there was, one of their subsidiaries was Fireman's Fund Insurance Company, and I worked at Fireman's Fund for the summer, and I enjoyed it. It was an adversarial position, and I loved it. I must have been doing something pretty good because towards the end of my stay.
Ray, could I interrupt you for a second? We're going to take a 1-minute break, and I want to pick up right where you left off with Fireman's Fund. Thank you.
Aloha, my name is Kenneth Lawson. I'm your host here at Life in the Law. I'm really interested in law as I practiced it for 18 years before coming to Hawaii. I practiced criminal law and civil rights law on the mainland. Now I teach law at the University of Hawaii Law School, William S. Richardson School of Law, and I bring in guests who are very current on legal issues that affect your life here in Hawaii. Come and join me every Wednesday at 1 p.m. as we explore how the law affects you, how the law is changing, and why it's important that you should care about what's going on in your community. See you then.
Aloha, hello. My name is Hong Jiang, and I host ThinkTech Asia every Tuesday afternoon at 4 p.m. At our show, we talk about issues that are important in Asia, such as environment, culture, history, religion. We broadcast live, and we're also on Olelo 54. Make sure to tune in, and we'll see you there. Thank you. Goodbye.
Welcome back to Living Legend Lawyers, the HSBA 3-digit project, and we're talking with Judge Arthur Fong and Raymond Tam, bar numbers 192 and 552. And Mr. Tam, you were telling us something that I think is very important for particularly our 5-digit members to know and understand. And you were right at the point where you're telling us that you were working at Fireman's Fund.
Right, Fireman's Fund was a subsidiary of American Factors, one of the big five companies. Their offices were on the 3rd floor of the AmFac building, and I worked there as a claims adjuster. It was I did small things, automobile damage, collisions, somebody hit somebody else's car or vehicle, and that's all I did. And I enjoyed it very much. But I must have been doing something pretty good because towards the end of my stay, James Strop, Senior Vice President of AmFac, comes over, sits down on my desk, introduces himself, Senior Vice President. He says, Ray, I've been watching you and observing you, and you do a very good job. He said, you know, you have a wonderful future here at AmFac. When you finish school, come back, and we can certainly use you here at AmFac. I was elated. I mean, Senior Vice President comes to talk to you, gives you the praise. I said, wow, that's great. So I finished law school, passed the bar, then I went into the military for 2 years in the Air Force as a judge advocate, trying court-martials. I came back in 1960. I went to Fireman's Fund, saw Tom Hopcroft, who was the claims manager, whom I had worked under in the summer. Mm-hmm. I said, Tom, I'm back. And I told him what James Strop had said to me. And I said, you know, but I want to be in private practice. So just give me any case. Give me the worst case you got, the subrogation case, the $50 case that nobody will want to try or handle. Let me do it, and let me show you how I can do it. He said, Ray, you know, I like you. You did a good job here. But the policy at Fireman's Fund is that we only hire lawyers, we only use lawyers from Robertson, Castle, and Anthony, Smith, Wild, BB&Ks, Anderson, Wren, and Jenks. And these were all white, haole firms. And we could never have gotten into these firms. I was really disappointed. Mm-hmm. And as I thought about it, I said, well, they represent the big five, which is basically white people. And these are the lawyers in this white man's firm, and frankly, there were no women as far as I know. I went to 4 insurance companies, 4 other insurance companies, turned down. It really upset me, and if I can use the word, I was really pissed. And I said, if they don't want me, I'm going on the other side, and I'll take them on. And for the rest of my career, all I did was plaintiffs, personal injury case. Best decision I ever made.
No, it was a great decision, Ray, and you've contributed so much to this community and to the bar. We thank you for that. And it pays pretty well too, I understand, sometimes.
Well, I made more money than Arthur. After that, I went to the corp counsel, and while he made less than $6,000, I made $600 a month, which was a princely sum at that time.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you for sharing that. And Judge Fong, if you could tell us then, I mean, how was it that you went from trying 50 cases or more on the criminal side to, you know, a different type of private practice, and then eventually to the bar, the First Circuit? I mean, to the bench of the First Circuit.
Well, as I told you earlier, when Bert Kobayashi Sr. told me who you keep and who don't keep, and we kept 6 Republicans, I was lucky enough that Governor Burns trusted me, even though he knew I had campaigned against him. He made me handle all the maritime, the transportation matters, aviation and otherwise, and all matters in Washington, D.C. His instruction to me was, you tell me the law and how I should proceed, I'll tell you what to do. I said, Governor, that's the way it should be. You're the client, and I am merely the mouthpiece. And luckily for me, I handled all that matter and went to Washington, D.C. regularly because I was able to meet with Washington Counsel, Arnold, Forrest, and Porter, and we had a great time representing the state in all these transportation matters. For some reason, Governor Burns trusted me with everything. In fact, he had me had breakfast with his kitchen cabinet, which is unusual. All Democrats sitting there, and hey, what am I doing with these people? But, well, he trusted me, and I never betrayed that trust. In fact, one time, as you read in the book that was prepared by.
Yes, I'd like to hold this up as well. This is the Judge Arthur S.K. Fong, Living a Life That Matters. And again, both of these gentlemen are graduates, distinguished graduates of St. Louis High School, and I think that their education there apparently played a pretty prominent role in your development. But go ahead. Thank you, Judge.
Anyway, as I was saying, when at one time, Burns trusted me enough to tell me when Kobayashi was appointed to the Supreme Court, change parties and I make you Attorney General. And I said, Governor, much as I like the job, I can't switch parties because of a job, and I never would do that. And he said, well, if you don't take the Attorney General job, will you take number 2? I said, on one condition. If I disagree with the man you're going to name as Attorney General, I'll tell him I disagree with him and ask to come to see you. He said, you can do that. Just call Mary Issa and you can come up and talk to me. And that happened only once.
Okay, so you went over your boss's head once.
I told him, I disagree with you, I'm going to tell the governor.
Okay.
And he said, and called Mary, and I went up and told him.
And how did that work out?
He changed it. He told me, you're right. I'm not going to follow his advice. That was it.
Oh, that's terrific. I'm guessing that you play golf occasionally with Democrats at Wildlife now, don't you?
Well, that's one of my weaknesses. I'm a regular golfer. We have a regular golf gang that plays regularly every Saturday, and we gamble more than we play golf. We love to bet on each other. You know, I've been lucky in golf. I've been successful and member guests and all kind of tournaments, and we even won the automobile scramble in Hawaii and went to Florida to play in the national championship, which was rained out the last day, with Clarence Shee and I can't remember Alan Cam, and Joe Nishimoto. We were really bad when we see what the other people were doing. We're really small hitters
Well,
compared to them.
and you go ahead, Ray,
I
please.
want to just interrupt you because I play with Arthur every so often in the Saturday golf thing. And when he says we gamble, I don't want to give the impression that we gamble for big stakes.
No.
The stakes are 50 cents, but we fight like it's for $5,000. And it was dog eat dog. There's no friendship when we're playing golf.
Yeah, well,
What is for 50 cents?
I think the members of the bar recognize that you're both very competitive men, and I'm sure that's been part of your success as well. So Ray, tell me about building the firm that you built. We all know, as members of the bar, and many members of the public know how influential and powerful your firm has been, and where the judges are now, justices are now that came out of your law firm. How did you do that? What was the formula, if there was one?
Well, my partner was Alvin Shim, who was a member of the bar before me, and I joined him back in 1972. And he had a great knack of finding people who were very, very bright and had great potential. One of the first ones that we talked about was Yukio Naito, and Yukio Naito was a partner. And eventually Yukio was chairman of the PUC and was in charge of drafting the water code of Hawaii. After that, Alvin said, you know, there's a young man who's doing very well. He's in Waianae right now. He passed the University of Hawaii. His name is John Waihee, and I think he's a good potential. And we interviewed John, and lo and behold, one of these days he became governor of the state of Hawaii. I interviewed Maisie Hirono, and when I interviewed her, I was involved in this heptachlor litigation. The heptachlor was a fungicide that was sprayed on pineapple plants, and then they were mulched and fed to the cows, and what it did was that it made the milk, it spoiled all the milk. And I needed someone for about 6 months, and Maisie was already in the legislature as a representative. And so it worked perfectly. She said, I need a job for about 6 months, and I hired her. And she was so good. She was so bright, so articulate. She was willing to work. She did a fantastic job. We kept her for 4 years. And at the end of the 4th year, I said to her, I said, Maisie, I want to make you a partner. But I can't do that if you're half lawyer, half politician. You have to make a choice. You have to be either lawyer or politician. If you become a lawyer, I'll make you a partner right away. And unfortunately for us, but fortunately for the state and the nation, she chose politics, and she became lieutenant governor, then U.S. representative, and finally senator. We also had Paula Nakayama, who's now a Supreme Court justice, Peter Carlisle, who became prosecutor for the city and county of Honolulu and then mayor, Bambi Weil, who was a newscaster, went to the University of Hawaii Law School, ranked first in her class, and was fantastic. Walter Kiramitsu became the appellate court judge. Mark Browning, who is doing a fantastic job in the family court. We've also had Frankie Yap, who became chairman of the Labor Appeals Board. But we've had a fantastic group of people who are very successful in politics and in life.
Yeah, you and your partners must have done a terrific job in recruiting and interviewing, and you certainly picked some of the best and brightest.
I think so. I think, and let me just tell for the young people, how we selected associates and lawyers. I would go to the court and watch lawyers, young lawyers trying cases. And I would go to the judges who I knew and ask them, tell me the 4 best trial lawyers that you see that has potential. And they would name 1, 2, 3, 4, and another 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'd interview maybe 3 or 4 judges. And eventually, one person would stand out in all 3, and that's the person we hired. So we hired from the prosecutor's office people like Roy Chang, Jim Nagel, Paula Nakayama was there, Peter Carlisle, Mark Browning. And so these were all great trial lawyers.
Well, that's sage advice for, and I need to ask you, Ray, on the subject of young lawyers, is there any particular advice you could give them with regard to working inside the courtroom and interacting with judges?
Oh, I think the important thing is to be well prepared. And by well prepared, I mean not just interviewing witnesses and reading the law and trying to prepare memos and so forth. I think a lot of work should be done in strategizing, of sitting back and wondering, how am I going to present this? How is the juror going to react to it? What's the other guy going to bring up? And how do I counter and attack what he's going to do? So
Ray,
it's
Ray, we're
great
gonna-
preparation.
Thank you. We're going to go to commercial right now. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm Jay Fidel, that's Ray Starling. We co-host a show called Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy, every Wednesday, 4 to 5 p.m. It's really interesting. You know, Ray has a way of unzipping these guys. He asks them these questions and all this stuff tumbles out, and we find out stuff we would never know about without Ray's questions. Thank you, Ray.
You're welcome, Jay. I'm very pleased to be your Ed McMahon every Wednesday at 4 o'clock here on the internet. So you can join us and see what's happening in the energy world, and there is a lot going on. So join us every Wednesday at 4 o'clock.
Yeah, come around, be energized, right here on ThinkTech. Aloha.
Yes, thank you, and welcome back to Living Legal Legends, our 3D project for the HSBA. We're with two very distinguished three-digit lawyers, Judge Arthur Fong, 192, and trial attorney Ray Tam, 552. And Ray, I want to follow up with you on the description of the outright prejudice that you encountered after graduating from the University of Notre Dame Law School, after having graduated from the University of Michigan, one of the premier institutions in the country. Where are we now? And if that ended, when did it end and why?
Well, I'll give you my take as to why it happened. As a young lawyer, the 442nd people came back from war and started to go to school, to law school and so forth. And so they ran for the legislature, and people like Dan Inouye, Spark Matsunaga, Sakai Takahashi, and so many others became elected officials. And as a young lawyer, I used to go to the legislature because, frankly, I didn't have much work to do. So I would sit in and listen to the committee meetings. And I would always see a person dressed in coat and tie, being very prominent, standing up there, standing before the committee. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I suggest strongly that you pass this bill because it would be great for Hawaii and so forth and so forth. And he would have facts, figures, and all kinds of charts. And I'd be, wow, flabbergasted. I was wondering, how's the other guy going to attack this? The other guy would come in with an aloha shirt. Usually he'd be Asian, Filipino, Chinese, Japanese, very sit down. And he would just say, you know, don't pass this bill. Really junk because it's going to be bad for labor. And then he'd walk away. And sure enough, that bill would not pass. It would be killed. And I think the law firms that I was talking about, the Hawaii law firms, recognized that to be effective, their favorite son status was over. They had to have local people appear before these local representatives to be effective, and that's how the thing changed.
Thank you. Thanks, Ray. Judge, could you tell us about read in your book, Living a Life That Matters, that there were 3 jobs that you were offered but you didn't take, and they've kind of made a difference in your life. Could you tell us about that?
Well, one that I already talked about was when Governor Burns asked me to change parties and become Attorney General. And
Yes.
I refused that because I had been schooled in Michigan, and that's a bedrock of capitalism.
Sure.
The second job I had was my buddy and good friend, Jack Bizua, suggested to the mayor at that time, Frank Fossey, that I might be a candidate for public prosecutor, having tried 50 cases or more, jury trials. So I went to my boss, Brett Kobayashi Sr., and asked for permission to take off for the interview. And Kobayashi asked me this question, are you interested in a job? I said, no. I probably would tell him no. That's when he gave me sage advice. If you don't intend to take the job, don't go, because then he'll never forgive you for turning him down. If you intend to go, you might take it, go. Otherwise, don't do it. So I canceled the meeting. The third most important job that I had was Jim Burns asked me to join him in the Intermediate Court of Appeals. I was ready to go back to practice because I had 3 kids in college already, and all I expect to go to college someday. And the job wasn't paying that much, but okay, I had my name submitted, and there was some opposition from people that I had ruled against and lawyers. And Senator Wadsworth Yee said, we have the votes if you want the job. I thought about it, I said, I don't need that job that bad. So I turned that job down, and it turned out to be the best decision I ever made because of that, I met a client that let me see the world the way I never would have seen it. He was buying a property in Kahala. My son and I, Peter, helped him with the buying the land, finalizing the land deal, architect, and contractor. And by the way, I asked the person who referred the client to me, why is he changing lawyers? He says, because that greedy old lawyer would charge him for having lunch with him, for going golfing with him, and everything else. That was a no-no in my mind because my parents told me, treat people with respect and honesty and fairly, and they will respond in kind. If they don't, all you lost is time. So we charged him practically nothing, nominal amount, and he said, you can't do that. If you don't charge me, I won't use you. I said, do what you want. Then we bought him the Hawaiian Life building. That was a big commission we had. We charged him, I think, $500, $1,000. He says, you can't do that. So he ended up buying me 2 cars, one Mercedes for my wife and one Mercedes for me. And from then on, he sent us on trips that unbelievable. We used to go to Tokyo, fully paid expenses, wife and I, stayed at Imperial Hotel, stayed a week. We went to Korea 3 times, before the Olympics, during the Olympics, and after the Olympics. All of these were paid for. I can't believe what he did for us. Anyway, treat people with respect and kindness and fairly. They're respect and kind.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Ray, could you tell us about your experience with interacting with judges briefly? And then I want to ask you about what I think is very important in your practice, in your contribution, and that's this China project and this interaction that you've had or been so instrumental in China.
Well, my interaction with judges were always exciting. I had motions before Judge Fong, and sometimes he'd rule against me, and as I was standing up, he'd say, well, if you don't like it, take me up. And I said, okay, let's do it. And so we go to the Supreme Court. But I always had a very good relationship with all the judges in the sense that I always try to, as I did in court, try to be very respectful, very straightforward, honest. I always thought my word was my bond, and I always kept it that way. Let me turn about the China program. The China program is really an exciting program that we began back in 1994. We talked about this International Academy of Trial Lawyers, and I was fortunate enough to have been selected as a member back in 1981. In 1981, the International Academy of Trial Lawyers, and still today, their objective was to find the best trial lawyers in the entire nation, limited to only 500. There are only 500 in the United States, and they're plaintiffs and defense lawyers. In 1994, I was, again, fortunate enough to be elected president and served as president. I took the group into China, and there I had the U.S. Ambassador J. Stapleton Roy talk to us. And Ambassador Roy said, you must help China. He said, Deng Xiaoping has now opened China up to the market economy. They are asking for help. They want to go into the World Trade Organization, but because they have no rule of law, they have been refused. He said, all of America has been refusing China because of what happened in Tiananmen Square in 1989. So in 1994, we started the China program. We brought in 10 Chinese government lawyers, those who drafted the laws of China, spent 1 week in Hawaii for orientation, and the following 2 weeks to our members' home, somebody in some place in New York.
Okay.
And
They
so-
were like sponsoring them.
and they would show them what the rule of law is and how Americans live, and that really has affected, helped China in drafting the laws. Let me give one quick example so that we can
Please.
understand that. When I left, when we finished our meetings, I stood up in front of the group and I said, my grandparents are from Guangzhou or Canton, China, and they were all so pleased because I know they were wondering whether I was Mexican or Filipino or whatever. And so it's like, you know, local boy went to America and made good. So I said, if you need anything, please let me know. And so sure enough, I come back to Hawaii and they said, please send us the Uniform Commercial Code. And so the following year, my wife and I went back to China, interviewed people, and they all had to speak English. And one of them said, thank you for sending the Uniform Commercial Code. He said, I am one of 2 persons who drafted China's negotiable instruments law, and we use as our basis the Uniform Commercial Code that you sent us. It's a fantastic accomplishment, because otherwise their negotiable instruments law would have been based on Russian laws or German laws or Japanese rules, but the negotiable instruments law is based on China, on American law. The next person, I said, why do you want to come to on this program? She said, I'm one of 5 to draft the aviation law of China. Another was the bank security laws, and so forth. So for 21 years, we have been in this program. Every year, we have sponsored 10, and they're all government lawyers, coming to the United States to help China draft their rule of law.
And that persists?
That is still going on.
Oh, that's,
I think Arthur may have some observations of that, because he's been to some of these meetings.
Oh, that China program is what has made China able to deal with the world, because their laws are patterned a lot after our uniform laws and modified to their needs. But they've done a great job. I think, Ray's modest person, but he really had done one of the outstanding professional lawyers in every respect. He's a great man. He's modest, that's all.
Judge, I'm going to give you the last word, as I'm sure Mr. Tam would want to, because you're the judge. Is there any advice that you could give our 5-digit lawyers that are now 10,000 strong in terms of their bar numbers?
You know what? The problem with our legal profession is it costs too much, it lasts too long, it never ends. You know, it seems that our system encourages, particularly defense, to delay. And we got to change the system, because you go to a lawyer's office and you give him a problem, you're going to, how much did it cost me? And the lawyer will say, I don't know, depends. That's a bad system. We got to change that system someday. I think we do subrogation for HEMIC, work comp carrier. We charge like plaintiffs. If we recover, we give you a good fat fee. If we don't, we nominal amount. That's the way it should. It has to change. Our system is not a good system.
So it's a result-driven or result-oriented
Result-driven.
system.
I think you can do that in every, even defense case, if you change the system. But you know, our system is reluctant to change. It's tied in that way.
Thank you. Any comments on that?
No,
that,
I
Rick?
think he's correct on that. I think that there's a lot of paperwork unnecessarily generated, because obviously, and I don't fault anybody, they charge by the hour, and win, lose, or draw, they're getting paid. And so that's, can I just say one thing?
Yes.
I had a book also, and I wanted to show everybody.
Yes, yes.
This book is it's called The St. Louis Man. And the only reason I had it written was because 50 years ago, I was trying to talk about my grandfather, and I knew nothing about my paternal grandfather. I never saw a picture of him, never saw him, didn't know anything about him. And I was thinking that 50 years from now, some great-great-grandchild will come up to me and say, I wonder who this guy was. Did he do anything good? Was he a good guy, a bad guy? And so we had this book written. And I somehow influenced Judge Fong to have his book written, and so we have these two books written. And it will be archived in the bar.
Yes, thank you very much. We appreciate that gift, and we look forward to having a copy of both these books available at the Hawaii State Bar Association. Thank you both very much, gentlemen. Really appreciate your cooperation and loved having you on the program.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Take your book back.
No, no,
You can-